Hello, my name is Joe DeSilva. This is my uh, Module 1 video for EDL 854, Building Finance. So first, to start off with, this is my personal education mission statement. As educators, we have a moral obligation to provide all students with high-quality learning opportunities in order to ensure that they are career and college readiness. This is actually a modification of my current principles. Something he said inspirationally at one of his staff meetings, and that was that the idea that educators have a moral obligation to provide these educational opportunities to students, simply because if we slack at our jobs as educators, it has a real financial and real life impact on our students down the road, 20 years. If we think back to the impact that our teachers had upon us and what kind of power we have to for earning potential, for inspiration, for driving towards career skills. We have a moral obligation to make sure that our students are provided these opportunities, because it changes lives, and it's not something that we should be taking lightly. So when we're thinking about this idea of should we, is that lesson really important, or can I afford to take off, a particular day? Does it really matter if I teach this stuff? And the answer is always yes. That it is. It does matter. It does matter how well we do our jobs. So this is me. This is what I look like, as you can see. And my job is to help teachers do awesome stuff. If we are more than our job titles, we are what we do. I help teachers do really awesome things. So this is pre-COVID. This is this is kind of some of the stuff that I used to do in my previous position, which is very similar to what I do now, except I now work with high schoolers and high school teachers instead of mostly elementary teachers. So right now, or some of the awesome stuff that I do is I create school and industry partnerships. So I go out and I find people that want to support schools and support students and support teachers, and figure out ways that we can collaborate with them. Field trips. We work on field trips, going places and doing experiential learning, not just going to a museum and seeing things, but actually getting out there and doing things. Family engagement nights. That was also pre-COVID. And that was getting out there into the community and engaging parents and families, telling them about the programs that we as a school, we as a district offer, and making sure that students are given some sort of enrichment opportunities outside of the building. Then summer experiences. That is from anything from camps to field trips to guest speakers to anything out of the that students can engage. We can engage the students in during the summer. I helped teachers do all of these things. These are not necessarily items that I presented or organized or did myself. I managed the teachers that made the activities, that organized the field trips. I helped facilitate that stuff. So I help teachers do awesome things. All right, what is my job? My job right now is as a signature program facilitator for the information management program at Chesapeake High School. In Anne Arundel County Public Schools, every high school has a unique program. They're called signature programs. It's kind of like a non-magnet magnet, where students can be cohorted based on their interest. And at our Chesapeake High School, we have an information management program, which focuses on computer science, cyber technology, communications, graphic design, business, things of that nature that are all part of our information management program. And students that are interested in those classes and those courses can be put into a cohort where they get additional depth into that content area, as well as some additional guidance and support on going into careers that are related. So my job is to help those teachers do great things and provide enrichment opportunities for students in those areas. Anne Arundel County is a huge school district. We have approximately 82,000 students. We have about 5,500 teachers. And at my high school, which is actually the smallest one, which is where that star is, my high school is one of the smallest ones in the district at 1,500 students, and there's only about 130 teachers at the school. All right, so moving into a reflection on the resources. I didn't find these resources particularly new information. it's a lot of what I've seen over the years. I've done a lot of I've had a lot of experience uh, over the years working with budgets, working with large pots of money. My previous job was to facilitate the implementation of large federal grants from the Department of Defense. So I'd be part of programs that were managing millions of dollars. So I'm familiar with the ins and outs of district and site budget and financial management, because my job as the facilitator of those grants was to help create shortfalls as well as partnership opportunities on both the central office and school site base. So, some of the key things that I thought were, when they were talking about site versus centrally managed finances, the idea of needs consistency. I've seen that all in our district. Because we have 13 high schools, we do need to be consistent in what we're offering and how things are done. Um, we do look at cost effectiveness or economies of scale when you're buying toilet paper and paper towels. You create district-wide contracts for those things, which generally speaking provides more leverage, and you save money. And while people are thinking, well, why do we need to have county-wide contracts on paper? Well, if we're looking at it and we're saying, okay, well, we can save 20 cents per ream of paper, multiply that over the course of a school year times the number of schools. We are actually saving a significant amount of money, which then goes into providing educational opportunities for students. Process efficiency, yeah, so when we start looking at curriculum implementation, resource evaluation, technology, when we start looking at all of these things, process efficiency, having consistent policies from school to school builds a better network and more closely ties schools to one another. It also provides that central management provides a better way for teachers and staff and principals to have a consistency when they move within the district to different schools. So I thought that getting back to the resources, we looked at the various roles and responsibilities of principals. I thought it was odd that they included teacher salaries in there. That's not been my experience that principals manage teacher salaries. Those are generally speaking negotiated at a higher level. However, I could see that if you're working at a charter school or an independent school or a private school, that teacher salaries can be part of the responsibility of the principal, saying you have X number of dollars allocated for salaries, and you have to stretch that as much as possible. I thought also that it mentioned that hiring an accountant and an auditor for regular school account tracking and evaluations. I thought that was a little odd. That's not something that's done in our school district, but it does get to something that I mentioned on the next slide, which is some of the things that we haven't discussed yet. So financial terms, I thought out of all the financial terms that they talked about, reporting and assets and income and liabilities, et cetera, I was familiar with a lot of all of those terms. The only one that I thought was interesting was assets, simply because in comparison to a business, capital assets are not necessarily looked at as the same in businesses, because in a business you might own the building, whereas the building is not necessarily an asset to principals in the financial term of it. It's not generally speaking. So you don't look at the depreciation of a building. However, depreciation I did not see on there, which I thought was another issue that was kind of gleaned over or completely missed. And the idea of depreciation is significant. If you're looking at the depreciation of technology and having to replace it years down the line, you have to know where it may not be the depreciation of the value, but you know that school desks are only going to last X number of years. You know that classroom materials are going to only last X number of years. So you need to know your asset depreciation and your replacement timetable so that you can budget down the way, so that you're not replacing all of your Chromebooks all in the same year every 3 years. Otherwise, your other programs are going to take a hit. So you need to balance that out and make sure that you're replacing any technology that you have to replace out of your budget on a rotating basis, so that you're not being hit with those costs either every year or every 3 years. Other things that were not discussed in these articles, I thought, was a focus on equity. There was no mention of an equitable distribution on a central managed system, so that we're not talking about making sure that we have an equitable use of funds. That was not really an issue. There was arguments made that schools should have more autonomy. However, a wealthier school or region or cluster, and that's what we call them in our district, they have more opportunities versus schools that are also in our district that do not. And having it centrally managed provides an additional piece of equity to ensure that financial resources are not just going to those schools with higher income, higher property values. So equity becomes an issue. That wasn't really discussed in any of them. Accountability really wasn't, that the word accountability was not mentioned at all. And I thought that was another piece, that one of the arguments for centrally managed resources is so that there is additional accountability in place, so that principals are not just spending $50,000 a year on snacks for teachers or using it for furniture to redo their office. There is an accountability piece. Another piece that was not discussed in relation was balancing the role of manager versus educator. There was a lot of focus on financial management. That's fine, but to balance that out with the educational needs, there wasn't really a mention of curriculum or instructional materials or any of those things that principals have to put on the table. Now that may come later in the course. None of these were discussed in these resources. What I haven't seen my principal do, and I'm going to say principals plural, over the years, over the course of my experience, I've worked with about 20 different principals. As part of my grant, I worked with 8 different schools. So I've seen principals just do about everything that there is, everything that is listed in those articles. I've seen it more or less happen at one school or another, to varying degrees of success. But part of that hasn't been that wasn't really, it didn't have anything to do with me at some particular schools, but I've seen them having to manage. I've worked with business managers. I've worked with secretaries that are in charge of the financials. I've worked with fundraising groups. I've worked with PTAs. I've worked with all of these people. So I've seen principals manage and do just about everything mentioned in the articles. All right, future concerns. Familiar versus unfamiliar. Each district runs things a little differently. My concern is that my experience at my schools has only been within 2 districts. So what happens when I move to a smaller district or one that is not necessarily essentially managed? My experience won't match what those operational methodologies are. Changes in technology. I've talked with principals, and one of the big concerns that they have is that there seems to be their regular updating of technology on how finances are managed one way or another, which concerns them because there's a piece of accountability, there is a piece of equity, there is a responsibility piece, and when you change over technology, sometimes that leads to the inability to effectively manage the money, and things get left unspent or misappropriated or something along that line. So the idea is that technology does become a concern. One of the things that I really don't like about the way that schools are financially managed is that there is a funding availability changes from year to year. Good years, when you're talking about public education, you're talking about tax years, and funding based on county executives and school boards and county councils. When you're talking private schools, you're talking about fluctuations in enrollments. That changes year to year. So funding changes lead to modifications of priorities, short-term, long-term planning, staffing allocations, all of these things happening. So it's really difficult to say, in 5 years, I see a vision going forward. Well, that can change based on an up-down economy. And I really, that's one of my concerns.